would so proudly we hailed, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fights, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red blast, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land under the frame, and the home of the brave.
Don't be afraid, this is a low fat, and you are listening to HonestAnswerRadio.com. Now, where is the egg roll you guys promised me?
The views and opinions expressed on the Honest Answer Radio show are the opinions of Honest Answer Media and no one else. If you're hearing a syndicated broadcast of this show, don't hold it against the broadcaster. Rather, congratulate them on their openness, tolerance, and respect for the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. Thank you very much.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
And welcome one more time. Honest Answer Radio here on HonestAnswerRadio.com, where we're kicking the mainstream media in the teeth every chance we get. If this is going to be your first time listening to us, I'm going to be the Marty half of your dynamic host and duo this fine Thursday evening.
And on the Thursday evening edition of Honest Answer Radio, I will be the Casey half of this hosting shenanigans.
And we have a lot to get to tonight. I have quite a bit of audio that we've got to run through tonight. I'm just hoping I can get through all of it.
On Facebook, I teased out that you had been editing audio all day long so that we'd have, something to play for people. And I told them tonight's theme will be freedom.
Freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom.
Freedom is something that we're running out of here in the United States, but there ain't none in places like Cuba.
That's right. Freedom is also something that, I hate to say it, but it's something that we have taken for granted. And that is why we are running out of it at such an alarming rate, because I think we here in America are still taking freedom for granted. We are under the delusion that it could never be taken from us. We're the United States. We were founded on freedom. There's no way.
Individual freedom.
Individual liberty. There's no way that we would ever end up like Cuba. And I'm ashamed to say it, but if we keep living under this delusion that we are forever free, then we will go the way of Cuba, And it won't be because of any outside force coming and taking us over. It will happen from within.
It's happening.
And we will talk about that very thing tonight, as well as our take on Cuba and Venezuela and other places of assorted sundries. Marco Rubio, he made a speech on the floor of the House.
In
Or the
response
Senate.
In response to a speech from Tom Harkin.
Yes.
Who had gone
Democrat
down,
Tom Harkin.
Yeah, who had gone down to that socialist utopia of,
Paradise.
Of Cuba, the one that Michael Moore, went down and came back. Oh, the Cuban people are so free, and their healthcare system is so much better than ours. And,
Socialized education, what a marvel! Well, I'm not going to be able to play Rubio's speech in its entirety because it was 14 minutes long, but I did manage to clip a few things from it. And, on Marco Rubio, he's one of these characters that I just don't know how to feel about him. I know early on, like before the 2012 election,
we liked him.
We did, I still sort of like him. But then he went, after the 2012 election, he started doing this, pro-amnesty thing where he was starting to work with some of these Democrats, and he lied to us.
Democrats like Paul Ryan.
Yeah, yeah. But he lied to us about his plans for immigration. But then he started backing away from all of that amnesty talk, and I don't know if it's because he was getting beat up on for it so much, or if it was because he realized that he himself had been led astray by the people that he was trying to work with on immigration, and that maybe perhaps he had been lied to. We all have fallen prey to somebody in our lifetimes. We all make mistakes. We all, make huge step-outs at times when we shouldn't.
You know what I think happened?
What do you think happened?
Marco Rubio's from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think his mother was Cuban.
I believe both his parents are Cuban.
But at any rate, he's from Florida, where a lot of people who immigrate from Cuba end up living in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he went back home, and some of the Cuban folks that lived down there went and smacked him upside the head verbally.
That went through the ordeal of immigrating.
Yes. Which is not, don't even call it an ordeal. Man, our immigration system is not an ordeal to get through, no matter what these Democrats tell you. It's not an ordeal. We do make people jump through hoops to immigrate here legally.
Yeah.
There's a legal framework, but you can't call it an ordeal. Try immigrating to Australia sometime.
Well, it is. I call it an ordeal because it is time-consuming. It does take, in some cases, it
years.
takes years to accomplish. That, an ordeal doesn't make it a bad thing, but it does take a long time. And a lot of those people that might have jumped down his throat, they did look at it at times like they were going through a huge ordeal, and it doesn't look to them like, these people, you're just going to let them bypass that after all of the things I had to do?
11 million people all at one time, and then up to about 30 or 40 more million of their relatives.
But, ultimately, I don't really care what changed Marco Rubio's mind on amnesty. I could care less, as long as it did change. And he has since, like I said, he's backed away from that stance. He's not so pro-amnesty anymore. And when you hear him talking on the floor of the Senate, you can hear the anger in his voice. So let's take this first clip.
Let's hear.
This is after Tom Harkin has just sat down from telling everybody what a paradise Cuba is.
A few moments ago, the body was treated to a report from the senator from Iowa. about his recent trip to Cuba. It sounded like he had a wonderful trip visiting what he described as a real paradise. He bragged about a number of things that he learned on his trip to Cuba that I'd like to address briefly. He bragged about their healthcare system. Medical school's free, doctors are free, clinics are free. Their infant mortality rate may be even lower than ours. I wonder if the senator, however, was informed, number one, that the infant mortality rate of Cuba is completely calculated on figures provided by the Cuban government. And by the way, totalitarian communist regimes don't have the best history of accurately reporting things. I wonder if he was informed that before Castro, Cuba, by the way, was 13th in the whole world in infant mortality. I wonder if the government officials who hosted them informed him that in Cuba, there are instances reported, including by defectors, that if a child only lives a few hours after birth, they're not counted as a person who ever lived, and therefore don't count against the mortality rate. I wonder if our visitors to Cuba were informed that in Cuba, anytime there is any sort of problem with the child in utero, they are strongly encouraged to undergo abortions. And that's why they have an abortion rate that skyrockets, and some say is perhaps the highest in the world. I heard him also talk about these great doctors that they have in Cuba, and I'm no doubt they're very talented. I've met a bunch of them. You know where I met them? In the United States, because they defected. Because in Cuba, doctors would rather drive a taxi cab or work in a hotel than be a doctor. I wonder if they spoke to him about the outbreak of cholera that they've been unable to control, or about the three-tiered system of healthcare that exists, where foreigners and government officials get a healthcare much better than that's available to the general population. I also heard him speak about baseball, and I know that Cubans love baseball since my parents were from there, and I grew up in a community surrounded by it. He talked about these great baseball players that are coming from Cuba, and they are. But I wonder if they informed him. In fact, I bet you they didn't talk about those players to him, because every single one of those guys playing in the major leagues defected. They left Cuba to play here.
Ooh.
Yeah. He goes on to ask, because I watched his whole speech. He goes on to ask, how many baseball players from the United States defect and go to Cuba to play baseball?
How many doctors have left the United States to go practice medicine in Cuba? How many people have fled this country to go get medical care?
Well, you know, people are all the time, aren't they, getting in boats down there in Miami or Key West and taking off across the ocean to head to the socialist paradise? Or wait, it was the other way around,
yeah,
right?
they're actually going the other direction. There have been people that have gotten in wash tubs, man, just to take the current here. It's a very dangerous prospect to get on a raft, a homemade raft, and try to float to Florida from Cuba. But people are willing to die just to leave that little island there.
The socialist paradise.
That little paradise. When it was becoming that little socialist utopia, back when Fidel was taking over the country and doing his little coup. In order to keep it a paradise, they rounded up people by the thousands, and they put them in like a baseball stadium or a soccer stadium, whatever it was, and they shot them in the head. Che Guevara. You know, these days I see college kids and high schoolers walking around with these Che Guevara T-shirts on. You know, during the Occupy movement.
Oh yeah.
There were every time the cameras rolled on somebody, there was somebody standing there with a Che T-shirt on, and these kids, I almost guarantee you, they know absolutely nothing about Che Guevara and just how many of the Cuban people he personally executed just to form that socialist or communist utopia.
Well, yeah, you know, if you're going to make an omelet, man, you know, you got to break some eggs. So people that disagree with you, you know, they got to go. And
look who their friends are. Look who Cuba's friends are.
Let's
back
see.
back in the old days, the Soviet Union was their big buddy. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? They were going to let Soviet Russia park a bunch of missiles there on Cuba just so they could have a better crack at hitting the United States.
Let's see. Who else are their buddies? You know who one of their big buddies is right now?
Who?
Iran.
Oh.
Hezbollah, which is the state-funded or state-sponsored terrorist wing of the Iranian government, is Hezbollah.
North Korea.
North Korea, yeah.
Not
big,
too long
yeah,
ago, remember that ship got caught in the Panama Canal?
with
it was
a few weapons. Just
a few weapons that they were taking to North Korea. Wasn't they going back to North Korea?
I can't remember which way they were going, actually.
But we know that they were involved. It was a Cuba, North Korea
exchange
there. Hugo Chavez, before he died, a horrible scum death that he deserved.
Big buddies with Fidel.
Big buddies, yeah.
And Raul Castro.
And Raul. Yeah,
Raul runs the
still
country these days.
Yeah, he's still in control there. Bashar Assad.
Yeah, they're big buddies.
They're all part of a huge dictator club. What a wonderful place Cuba is. And Senator Harkin stood on the floor of the Senate.
The United States Senate.
And said how many people have come to him and said we really should be nicer to Cuba. Man, we've got to lift this embargo. We should allow, open up free travel back to Cuba so that, Americans can go to Cuba and enjoy what that paradise has to offer.
Yeah, ease up on the Castro brothers.
Harkin said we could learn so much from Cuba, particularly with their their form of medicine, where foreigners and heads of state get way better health care than the average human, where they have such a low infant mortality rate down there. Well, I mean, when you don't consider a newborn baby a life, if it passes, no big loss.
An abortion rate that may be number one in the world.
Number
possibly.
one. Hey, they're number one, man.
It's hard to tell, though, because, they report numbers about as accurately as Stalin reported on how many people he killed.
Well, it's only because we'll never really know those numbers, man. Because under those socialist, communist utopias, they're also pretty big on secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got another clip. There's more. There's more. I got three. I broke this down into three audio clips. Here's the second one. It's a little bit. It's only 30 seconds.
I heard about their wonderful literacy rate, how everyone in Cuba knows how to read. That's fantastic. Here's the problem. They can only read censored stuff. They're not allowed access to the internet. The only newspapers they're allowed to read are Granma or the ones produced by the government. I wish that someone on that trip would have asked the average Cuban, with your wonderful literacy skills, are you allowed to read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or any blog for that matter? Because the answer is no.
What a wonderful thing, their literacy rate. All those Cubans can read. Nobody can read propaganda better than the Cuban people.
That's right. All of them can read.
We were talking about who they're big buddies with. They're huge friends with Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
They've been Cuba has been nice enough to send advisors over to Venezuela to better equip them to deal with these uprisings from that, rowdy rabble of rebels who just don't know a good thing when they see one.
Yeah, they must be having a hard time with all that literacy stuff down there, and sometimes people just don't understand the good thing when they're living in it. And apparently people in Venezuela have gotten to the point where they don't understand how not having toilet paper or fuel
toothpaste.
or toothpaste or, other, basic necessities, they don't understand how that's actually better. They're better off that way.
Yeah. Yeah. They just don't
But it's
get
okay,
it.
man. It's okay. Cuba, the Castro brothers, sent some people down there to Venezuela to help show these people.
And help them get things into better order.
Yeah.
Now, of course, that may mean that they have to shoot some students in the head for protesting.
Well,
or,
you're going to have that.
Even in Venezuela's case, a beauty queen, one of a literal beauty queens, one of their, like Miss Venezuela or something along those lines. Rubio had a picture of her being put on a motorcycle, laid on the back of a motorcycle, where she had been shot in the head and they were trying to get her to a hospital. Bless her heart, she didn't make it. All for protesting the government, for speaking out.
Against their paradise.
Yeah, against that socialist paradise that Venezuela modeled after who?
After the Castro, actually,
Yeah.
Cuba and Russia and North Korea.
What a great place Venezuela and Cuba must be, man.
And by the way, let's explain to people right quick. I'm sure some of you probably don't have a map in front of you. But if you want to find Venezuela on a map, take the map down to Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Hang a right.
Yeah, just follow.
Or a left if you're
You
going
can
down and you hang a left.
change. Just follow the chain of Caribbean islands. Go out of the Gulf of Mexico, across the Caribbean Sea, the very top of South America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The very top.
They're not
just across the Caribbean Sea from the United States.
Just skip a stone across there and you'll hit a Venezuelan right in the head.
And they're big buddies with North Korea, which they're a nuclear power.
Yeah, yeah.
And Iran, who, well, they're a nuclear power now.
And they promote religious freedom in these countries.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of freedom you get in those paradises, though.
Well, Marco Rubio was speaking about is the man's name? Is it
Maduro?
Goss?
Oh,
he was down there handing out satellite phones to some of
Jews.
the Jews down there.
Yeah,
and that the Cubans didn't think that was all that necessary. Either that or they were just so grateful to him that they decided to give him a permanent home there in Cuba. Mm-hmm. We call that a hostage in this country, but down there they call it giving him a permanent home. And they were so nice to him down in that socialist paradise, that utopia. They were so nice about it that, they let him take 10,000 steps a day, and they let him do pull-ups. They even let him make his own necklace out of some bottle caps.
Because they're so sweet down there.
What a nice bunch of people. Tom Harkin was so right. We could learn so much from the Cubans. My gosh. I got another clip. This one's about almost 3 minutes. This is where Rubio is kind of wrapping up.
I listen to this stuff about Cuba, and I listen to what's happening in Venezuela. They're very similar, not just in the repression part, but the economics part. Venezuela's an oil-rich country with hard-working people. They have a shortage. We don't have an embargo against Venezuela. They have a shortage of toilet paper and toothpaste. Why? Because they are incompetent. Because communism doesn't work. They look more and more like Cuba economically and politically every single day. What's the first thing the Venezuelan government did when these broke out? They cut off access to Twitter and Facebook and the internet. They ran CNN out of there. They closed down the only Colombian station. Years before, they had closed down all the independent media outlets that criticized the government. Where did they learn that from? From Cuba. And yet we have to listen to what a paradise Cuba is. Well, I wonder, how come I never read about boatloads of American refugees going to Cuba? Why have close to 1.5 million people left Cuba to come here, but the only people that leave here to move there are fugitives from the law and people that steal money from Medicare that go there to hide. Why? How come no American baseball players defect to Cuba? Why don't any American doctors defect to Cuba if it's such a paradise? He cited a poll. More Americans want normal relations with Cuba. So do I. A democratic and free Cuba. But you want us to reach out and develop friendly relationships with a serial violator of human rights who supports what's going on in Venezuela and every other atrocity on the planet. On issue after issue, they are always on the side of the tyrants. Look it up. And this is who we should be opening up to? Why don't they change? Why doesn't the Cuban government change? Why doesn't the Venezuelan government change? Throughout this week, I will be outlining proposals and ideas about what we need to do, the sanctions we should be pursuing against the individuals responsible for these atrocities. So in North Korea, we have sanctions. Why? Because they're a terrorist government and an illegitimate one. Against Iran, we have sanctions. Why? Because they support terrorism and they're an illegitimate government. And against the Cubans, we have sanctions. Why? Well, you just saw why. Sanctions are a tool in our foreign policy toolbox. And we, as the freest nation on earth, are looked to by people in this country and all around the world to stand by them in their moment of need when they clamor for freedom and liberty and human rights. They look for America to be on their side, not for America to be cutting geopolitical deals or making it easier to sell tractors to the government there.
Tell him, Marco. Tell him. He wants to cite that poll. Tom Harkin wants to cite a poll. More Americans are wanting us to open up normal relations with Cuba. And I'm with Rubio. I would too. I would too.
Yeah, when
but
the Castro
only a
brothers,
democratic, free Cuba.
Yeah, when the Castro brothers are gone and people get to actually vote in free and fair elections over there,
yeah,
sure.
He calls himself a president, Raul Castro does, but he's never been elected to anything. He assumed power in Cuba when his brother decided to step down.
Well, yeah, I mean, Fidel elected him.
Yeah.
He got the only vote that counted.
The only thing free in Cuba is a bullet to the head, or a prison. That's it. That's all you get in Cuba that is free. And you know, man, what scares me is what we were saying at the opening. It's not too far out of the realm of possibility for the United States to go the way of Cuba. I'm sure Senator Harkin, who's a Democrat, does love the idea of the United States learning from Cuba. One of the main things that people like Tom Harkin want us to learn from Cuba
is how to handle dissenting opinions here in the United States.
Yeah. You know, here in this country we have this pesky little thing called the First Amendment.
Well, before you get to the First Amendment, I just got one question that I think is very pertinent.
Okay.
Why didn't Tom Harkin just stay in Cuba? I mean, why would he want to come back here if their healthcare system and their literacy rate and their infant mortality rate and everything, if everything there is so great, why do you want to come back to the United States?
Well, that's just I pretty much just said that because he wants to model the United States a little bit more along the lines of Cuba. He came back here. That's what his whole speech was about there on the Senate floor. It was about how wonderful Cuba is, trying to sell us on the idea of Cuba. We're already starting to make those little baby steps that way into being more like Cuba. I mean, people like Tom Harkin and Harry Reid, they kind of like the way that the Castro brothers handled dissension.
Well, we know about Harry Reid because, you know, he said earlier in the week that all these people who are talking about horror stories about Obamacare, about losing their coverage, he says he calls them all liars.
Just like the Castro brothers, you know, say that everyone who has spoken out against, you know, any of the horrible things that they have done to the Cubans down there, All of those are lies.
Mm-hmm.
They're just lies, even though there's empirical evidence to show otherwise. They're lies.
It's much better to be able to call people liars and have the government make that stick.
Right. Well, let's let Harry speak for himself since you brought that up. Let Harry talk.
Were able to buy a health insurance they could afford and they could trust. Despite all that good news, there's plenty of horror stories being told. All of them are untrue, but they're being told all over America. The leukemia patient whose insurance policy was canceled would die without her medication. Mr. President, that's an ad being paid for by 2 billionaire brothers. It's absolutely false. Or the woman whose insurance policy went up $700 a month. Ads paid for around America by the multi-billionaire Koch brothers, and the ad is false. We heard about the evils of Obamacare, about the lives it's ruining, and Republican stump speeches and ads paid for by oil magnates, the Koch brothers. But in those tales, turned out to be just that, tales. Stories made up from whole cloth, lies distorted by the Republicans to grab headlines or make political advertisements. Mr. President, these two brothers are trying to buy America. They not only funnel money through their Americans for Prosperity, they funnel money into all kinds of organizations to do the same thing that they're doing.
Harry Reid really cannot stand that the Koch brothers are paying for these ads where these people are showing where they've either lost their health coverage or their health coverage has went up so much that they can no longer afford it. He just called that the lady with leukemia a liar.
Yeah.
She's absolutely lying, and the Koch brothers just made this up.
They paid her to lie. Maybe,
even though she had the documentation, even though her own doctor has since went on national television and said, no, she did lose her health coverage. That couldn't possibly be true because Harry Reid says it's a lie.
Maybe, see, what he actually has a problem with is that this lady couldn't get the message out on her own and couldn't get a big enough platform to put the message out.
Mm-hmm.
But the Koch brothers rather generously gave her a voice.
And they hate those two.
They hate those two. And look, I'm not a big fan of the Koch brothers either.
No, I'm not.
Because they support some political candidates that I don't support.
But they're not they're not the largest political contributors to the Republican Party or to any anything political. As a matter of fact, they're number 59 on the list. Number 59.
And, because there's no such thing as Democrat money making it into the electoral process.
No, there's no way that could possibly be happening, Casey.
Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg,
George Soros. George Soros has never given a dime to the Democrats.
Or to, produce any ads. He doesn't financially support any of the Democrat organizations
or the
that
unions.
Put out ads.
They've never donated a cent.
Right.
They've never contributed a cent to the Democrats or any of their candidates or the Democrat Party as a whole or any of their agendas or any of that.
None of their political action committees get any money from any kind of left-wing millionaire or billionaire.
No, of course not. I had no doubt that Tom Harkin has a lot of admiration for Cuba and the Castro brothers. I have no doubt that Harry Reid would co-sign everything that Tom Harkin had to say. One thing that those two men have in common is that they would love to be able to squelch the First Amendment in this country.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
That is, when the First Amendment goes, so goes the United States. Were it up to the Democrats, they would find a way to stifle free speech in this country.
See, the First Amendment, it's like when you're, remember back when we used to wrestle in high school? They would tell you, control the other guy's head, because if you control the head, the rest of his body has to follow.
Right.
Well, the First Amendment is the head of liberty in this country.
That's why it was the first one.
Yeah. That's why they made it number one. Because our founders knew how venal and how corrupt government can be. And so they established that Bill of Rights to limit government, not to limit people, but to limit government. That's why the First Amendment is number one. It is the head of liberty in this country.
That's why when Hugo Chavez took control of Venezuela, and when the Castro brothers took control of Cuba, one of the first things they did was to take control of the media.
Got to, have to, because communism and socialism and those little utopia paradises down there, they can't exist where there is a free exchange of ideas. So these days, the first thing that goes when when power changes, it's not necessarily their press. It's the internet. First, you've got to cut off the internet. As a matter of fact, Cuba was actually having a little trouble with that. Yeah, and Venezuela was having a little trouble.
Right, Venezuela.
Yeah, and but the Cubans sent them some expertise down there to show them how to sever the internet.
Because you've
from
got
the people.
to do that. Because people on the internet, man, they can say anything they want. They might even put something truthful on there. If the people know everything that their government is up to, they won't tolerate it.
And if they're just allowed to talk about it, just all willy-nilly...
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
That is dangerous. Or at least it's dangerous to a tyrant. When the people are able to have a light shone on that corruption, they won't stand for it. And these tyrants know that. People like Harry Reid know that as long as the Koch brothers are allowed to finance, just a regular old American with leukemia, to show where she's lost her health coverage because of something that our tyrant president has done, and tyrants like Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi has done, they know that the American people are not going to want to stand for it. There was no way that Obamacare could have been put through.
Not if everybody had been allowed to read it. You can't. Are you crazy?
If there was a light that had been shown on Obamacare before it was voted on, they know good and well that the American people would never have said, please, can we have that? And if that Obamacare thing was so wonderful, why are their numbers falling so short? Why are their enrollment numbers coming up so low? Why aren't they having more trouble? The trouble they should be having would be they've got so many people trying to sign up that they're not able to keep up with it all. But instead, all you hear is crickets when they say, who wants to sign up for this? Businesses, if it was so wonderful, business owners would be flocking to it going, hey man, this is really taking a burden off of me, to provide health care for my employees. Thanks so much. But
I'm going to go hire some more people now.
Yeah.
But guess what, man? That's not happening.
No. But if it was up to people like Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, even Barack Obama,
yeah, we'd all shut up.
Free speech would not happen in this country. Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania, he spoke about that on the House floor.
Yeah,
about our First Amendment.
Let's let people know. Mike Kelly was an Obama supporter.
Was. Was. Not anymore.
He doesn't sound like it anymore.
No, he doesn't.
But this was a
sound
man
like
who had previously supported Barack Obama and supported Obamacare.
Mm-hmm. But alas, the light of truth was shown on it and on Obama. And in good conscience, he just can't. But he is very passionate about our First Amendment. He's very passionate about keeping that right intact. And even he, from his position there as a representative, he sees what his colleagues are trying to do. He sees the effort to squash free speech going on right there in his own little workplace amongst his colleagues.
Ah, you're putting words in his mouth.
Oh, yeah?
It's rather chilling that 223 years ago, our First Amendment rights were enshrined in our Bill of Rights. And we've all taken the same oath. We said, to the best of our ability, we preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. I'm hearing now dollar signs, there are dollar numbers being there, say, well, we can't afford to spend this kind of money. Never before in America have we ever worried about the cost of money when it comes to defending our freedoms and liberties under our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. It has no dollar attached to it. It is basically fundamentally American. And when we talk about the American citizens not being able to talk that way, the First Amendment, by the way, protects us and enshrines us. 45 words in the First Amendment that protect and enshrine our rights. This is not a political issue. This is not about an R or a D. This is about a we. This is about the entire country. And if we're going to sit here and say, oh, no, this just has to do with an election. An election? Really? An election? We cannot allow the voice of the people not to be heard in our town squares. And when they need to speak out, they need to know that they can speak out without being threatened, without being worried about what's going to happen to them. This is so basically who we are as Americans. It has nothing to do with Republicans and Democrats, independents and libertarians. It has to do who we are. If we cannot see that and we turn this into a political agenda and talking points, then my gosh, how far we have fallen from what the founders intended at the very beginning. We cannot have this debate in serious and say we're spending too much money to protect the rights of our American citizens. That is absolutely foolish. So I am very, very strong on the protection of what we're talking about. 3865 reconfirms what the American people need to know. They can speak out on anything, anytime, anywhere they want without having to be worried about anybody interfering with it, and especially a government. This is a government that serves the people. This is not a people that serve our government. And to think that we have to have a piece of legislation in addition to our First Amendment rights on the floor is absolutely so different than what we think. Again, the voice of the American people has got to be heard. I don't care, conservative, liberal, I don't care where you're coming from. You have the right to speak out anytime you want.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I thank you, and I yield back.
What he was talking about there is they've actually had to introduce a bill that would more or less put a leash on the IRS to say you can't go after people just because they happen to be speaking out against the President of the United States. It's one of our fundamental rights as American citizens that when our leaders are doing things that are contrary to the Constitution, that are going against the Constitution of this country, it is one of our fundamental rights that we should be allowed to speak up without fear.
Or if any of our leaders is doing anything that we just don't like, for whatever reason, no matter which side of the aisle you sit on.
Absolutely.
No matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, an independent, a Tea Party, or Libertarian, a LaRouchian, it doesn't matter.
He says it shouldn't be a political. This shouldn't matter whether there's an R or a D in front of your name, and he's right about that. But here's the thing. At this point in time, there is a huge difference in who gets to speak out about what. Like, if Barack Obama was a Republican, there would be Democrats calling for his impeachment immediately for the targeting if he had been targeting progressive groups or liberals or Democrats.
Oh,
if George Bush had went after some of the Democrats when they were burning him in effigy. Literally. If he had went after some of those groups and sicked the IRS on him,
they would have been calling for his impeachment.
They would have been calling for his head, his execution. But see, it's not. This president happens to be a Democrat. This president happens to be a Democrat. So it's okay. It's okay that that people that speak out against him, it's okay when he says, IRS, don't you think maybe those people just need to be audited? If you're a conservative group in this country, if you're a member of the Tea Party in this country, and you want to get a bunch of like-minded people together and apply for the same tax-exempt status as some of these progressive movements,
like Planned Parenthood,
or like Battleground Texas, you should be able to do so without fear of reprisal from the IRS,
without fear that the FBI will show up at your business,
or the ATF, without anybody trying to seize your assets or shut your business down. Your personal, if you own a business and you happen to be a member of one of these groups, you shouldn't have to worry that the IRS or the FBI is going to invade your business.
And one of the biggest things about the 501c4s, it isn't as much the tax-exempt status, although that is important. It's also the donor list. Mm-hmm. Because, see, if the IRS decides that your group doesn't meet that 501c4 status, then you have to disclose who your members are. So, freedom of association, which is also granted under the First Amendment.
Right.
That's gone.
Oh,
that's
no.
Gone
you're still free to do so. Just know that the IRS will then begin digging into your personal finances.
And you will be your name. If you would like to keep your name private, you can't.
That's right. It will then become a matter of public record.
So, there's more than just people, being silenced by saying, okay, you can't say that here. It's also your right to associate without fear of the government.
And you would think that as a constitutional law professor, President Obama would know these things. You would think, as a man who supposedly teaches young people about our Constitution.
Well, you would also think that our Attorney General, who took, is the Attorney General for all of the United States, not just those that agree with the President, you would think that once allegations of illegality in the IRS came up, that he would turn things over to the criminal branch of the Justice Department.
Or at least appoint a special prosecutor.
Instead of handing it off to somebody in the who was one of President Obama's supporters in the the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department.
A happy note, though, I saw right before we went on the air, I saw an article saying that Lois Lerner, who pled the fifth on her involvement with all these IRS targeting conservative groups, is going to be subpoenaed again to come and sit before the committee.
I believe she's already received it.
And, if she doesn't want to talk this time, there is now talk of contempt charges. So we will be keeping our eye on that. But, I brought up the fact that the president teaches constitutional law for a reason.
I bet you had something else in mind.
Well, I do. I have another audio clip from a constitutional law professor from George Washington University. His name is Jonathan Turley.
We're familiar with Mr. Turley's work.
We played some of his stuff before. He is talking about the president's... See, this is another thing. that Tom Harkin and Harry Reid just love about the Castro brothers in Cuba and Venezuela? See, down there, they don't have to be bothered with a pesky old Congress to get any laws passed, or they don't have to they don't have to abide by any law that's on the books.
No.
They
See,
can just
if the president,
do things as they please.
If their president sees something that needs doing, he can just go ahead and just decree it.
Just go right on and do it, man. It don't matter. If there's something about a law down there that seems to be getting in their way, the Castro brothers, man, we don't need no stinking law. They just go around that part of the law because they can do that.
Because they don't have any kind of balance of power.
No, man, they've got pens and phones down there. They know how to get things done. But listen to what Professor Turley had to say about that.
I believe we are now at a constitutional tipping point in our system.
By the way, this is a clip from Fox News with I believe it's either Megyn Kelly or Martha McCallum. Yeah, Martha McCallum.
I believe we are now at a constitutional tipping point in our system. It's a dangerous point for our system to be in. And I believe that your response has to begin before this president leaves office. No one in our system goes it alone.
Well, our system is incredibly resilient. It's been through wars and depression and civil unrest. But the system itself is based on this notion of three bodies that's sort of in an orbit that is balanced. They're locked together, the three branches of government. And that tripartite system, as it's called, protects civil liberties, protects individual rights, because it prevents any one branch from assuming so much power that it becomes dominant. Well, what we're seeing, and it didn't begin with President Obama, but it certainly accelerated under President Obama, is the concentration of power in the executive branch. And we are at a point that I consider quite dangerous. It's not that President Obama is a dictator. I'm not questioning his motivations. What I'm questioning is his means. That is, we have to stand back as citizens and accept that policies change and presidents change. The one thing that can't change is the system that has served us so well. That system is, in fact, changing, in my view. I've watched this destabilization occur over the course of the last two presidents, and there's not been a whimper of regret or opposition of any substance coming from Congress. That's something the framers didn't anticipate. They assumed that the three branches would jealously protect their own authority and also protect the other branches from intrusion. But we now have two branches that are virtually inert, the legislative and judicial branches.
They're virtually inert, Casey.
Yeah, they're not...
they're not even standing up for their own rights.
Yeah, which, by the way, that means they're not standing up for ours either.
Bingo. There are Republicans as well as Democrats that are responsible for this. We have a House of Representatives, we've talked about this before, that has weapons at their disposal. They have the power of the purse at their disposal, that they could cut the funding off to a lot of these programs and regulatory agencies that the president is forcing down the throats of the American people, but they just don't have the courage to do it.
Look, man, now look. You can't just go expecting these Republicans to go and do their jobs like that all willy-nilly, because then they're not going to win the elections. Somebody is going to say something mean about them on CNN. Brian Williams over on NBC will say nasty, dirty things about them if they do their jobs.
They can't handle it when
Andrea Mitchell will have sarcasm in her voice.
And when one of their own does try to stand up for the American people and does try to say, hey, wait a minute, we promised the people that voted for us that we would stand for them and that we would do everything in our power to keep these very things from happening, they railroad them.
Because they're wacko birds.
I mean,
you can't listen to wacko birds all willy-nilly like that.
Wasn't it just, it was either Tuesday or last week played a clip where they were saying Ted Cruz is going to have practically needs a food taster to have dinner with his own Republican colleagues. Why? Because Ted Cruz had the courage to stand up for the people that elected him.
Either that, or he was afraid that if he didn't, the people back home in Texas would let him hear about it when he got home. Either way.
But he promised those people before they elected him, if you will elect me, I will do everything in my power to stop the damage that Obamacare can do to this country. I promise you I'll do that. And he has. At every opportunity, he has tried everything within his power to put the brakes on it. And when he has, they've tried to gut him for it. His own party has tried to gut him for that.
John McCain and Lindsey Graham have slammed
John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, has tried to slam him for that. He may not be in the same part of Congress.
No, but they're both Republicans.
They're both Republicans.
Well, theoretically.
Yeah, in theory. He has very few allies there in his own party. Like Mike Lee that we just heard from a minute ago. He stands with Ted Cruz. He's tried, to stand. Jeff Sessions, our senator, has tried to stand with Ted Cruz.
And there's a few others.
Yeah.
But
they're few and far between, man.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's 535 members of the legislature. If you've only got 10 or 15 who are actually willing to stand up for the people that elected them, man, what kind of system are we in here?
Yeah, I'll tell you what kind of system we're in. We're in a system right now that is slowly eroding to the point that we are going to end up like Cuba or Venezuela if our representatives that we send to Washington to speak for us and stand for us continue to refuse to do so.
Yeah.
We will go the way of Cuba.
And it'll be me and you in one of those soccer stadiums.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Or could be any of our listeners in one of those stadiums. Anyone that stands for liberty, anyone that has the courage to speak out against their government when their government is going against their own founding documents.
Now, let's put it this way. If some of you out there listening tonight happen to be progressives, when the next president gets in, who thinks differently from you, when you speak out against it, it could be you in the soccer stadium with a bullet in the back of your head.
That's right. That's right.
It doesn't always have to be a Democrat that does it. All that has to happen is the balance of power go all one way. It's supposed to stand on three legs.
Mm-hmm.
When it's only standing on one leg, anything can happen.
Well, we are at the end of our rainbow, brother dear.
Already? Already.
Time flies when you're mad. Before we get off the air, don't forget to look down below the player there. If you're listening to us on HonestAnswerRadio.com, just below the Honest Answer player, you will see a little yellow button that says Donate. If you like the Honest Answer and you want us to continue to bring you honest answers to the issues that are important to you, feel free. Donate till your heart's content. Another way you can help us out is to go over there to our sponsors page. We've got really neat sponsors that offer good products and great services.
And as a matter of fact, you can probably ask one of our listeners out there. Richard ordered from myfoodstorage.com. He said, boy, he got all kind of stuff.
Yep. Lifelock.com. You know, if you're worried that some of your private and personal information is going to find its way into the hands of people who want to use it for nefarious purposes, lifelock.com they are the best in the business at keeping that from happening. We also have sponsors like V2 electronic cigarettes. If you're trying to quit smoking like me and Casey and Tina are, hey man, the electronic cigarette is the only way to fly. We also have myfreedomsmokes.com. They're our newest sponsor. As a matter of fact, we just got something from My Freedom Smokes today. And I'm here to tell you folks, this is some high quality stuff. I am very impressed.
All of our sponsors, I mean, we picked these folks, hand-picked. Not only did they put out quality product, but not only does, I was saying before my microphone decided to die, not only do our sponsors put out quality products, but if you go to those sponsors through our sponsors page, then you get a deal.
And what a deal. What a deal, man. Anytime you can save 10% on something, you're doing great, man. And if you go to any of these sponsors from our website, you're going to get additional savings. Don't cheat yourself. Treat yourself. Speaking of treating yourself, go over there to our channels page. It's not just Honest Answer Radio that you can find there. There's thank you. I couldn't get it out.
Radio, Jeff and Sean provide you with the fastest hour of sports on the internet. Not only do you get your sports fix, but if you look on that channels page, you will also see Challenge from the Heart with Pastor Rick Cope from First Baptist Church, Lillian, Texas.
You can get your heart fixed by listening to Pastor Rick. And that's important. That's important. And you know what? If there's another way that you can listen to Honest Answer Radio. You can hear us by going to goingbeyondradio.com, and they don't just carry Honest Answer Radio. They've got a veritable cornucopia of internet radio there that can fit all of your internet radio listening needs. They've got paranormal shows, economic, they've got technical things.
And if you have a mobile phone, you can get Going Beyond Radio through Shoutcast, Live 365, Blueberry, iTunes, Roku.
Man, they've got, they're connected in so many different ways it's sometimes scary. Goingbeyondradio.com. Just head on over there and tell Chuck that we sent you. Well, all right, man. This is Thursday, which means we won't be back again until Tuesday. So there's no telling what's going to be happening over the weekend. You guys just keep your head down, keep your eyes open, keep your heart open. Be good to each other. And before we get out of here, got one more thing that I would like to say. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land.
Amen.
So until Tuesday, folks, good night.
Good night, y'all.